This happened a while ago. I was driving home from a long day at work in the city. My house is in the suburbs, a decent distance outside of the city, so every day after getting out at 10, I have an hour of driving. A lot of the driving is through empty roads once I get out of the city, so it isn't that bad, except for the amount of time it takes up. I was a little extra tired this night, which wasn't for any specific reason, but it was just one of those days. I was just half an hour out from my house and was driving along one of the more empty single-lane highways when, through the dim street lights, I saw something blocking the road. My eyes woke up and I eased onto the brakes. As I got closer, the fog cleared enough for me to tell what it was. A tree laying over the entire road. I looked at it for a moment, just confused. There were no recent storms or high winds, and it wasn't here in the morning. I left the car on but put it in park, then got out and looked around. There were no other fallen trees or signs of anything else being damaged. I walked closer and looked at both ends of the tree, but it was going all the way from both edges of the forest. No way through or around. This was such a bizarre situation, and it wasn't until now that the annoyance started to hit me. The closest alternate route was 15 minutes back and would take me the long way, adding a total of at least an hour to my already long drive. I thought about calling someone, but even then it would probably take even longer to get it cleared. As I stood out in the road next to the tree, a light suddenly flashed on from the other side, shining through the branches and leaves. It wasn't from an approaching car though. The car had to have already been sitting there, and for some reason they only just now turned on their lights. As I tried looking through the branches to see what I could see, I heard a door open and close, and then footsteps approaching the other side of the tree. "Hello," I called out, hoping to just ease the tension a bit. I heard someone mumble something, but not really in response to me, more of just to themselves. I thought maybe they too were frustrated about the blocked road, but then the branches started moving, and the leaves rustled as a man started climbing over. I took a few steps back, going closer to my car as they jumped onto my side of the road. From what I could see, it was a man with a short beard and a buzz cut, wearing a thick jacket. He looked at me and started walking closer, still not having responded to me. I quickly got inside my car, unsure of what the man was doing, but I started to get a really bad feeling in my gut. He started walking faster, almost into a light jog, as soon as I closed the door. The man came right up to the window and looked at me. No smile or friendly face, just a blank and empty expression as he knocked on the window. What do you need?" I asked nervously. The man didn't respond, but instead started mumbling to himself again as he looked me in the eyes and continued to knock on the window. I kept asking what he wanted, but he wouldn't stop knocking and started to get more aggressive, hitting the window with his fists. I quickly put the car in reverse and backed out, hearing a dull thud on the door, likely from the door latch being ripped from his hands. After hearing that, I knew that this was even more dangerous than I initially thought. I spun the car around and drove away, so focused that I didn't even check my mirrors to see what the man was doing. Once I made it to the bypass, I pulled off and called in the situation. As you might have imagined, the man and his car were nowhere to be found. I don't know much else of the situation, having only what happened to me to go off of, but I do know that the workers sent to clean up the fallen tree said that it had been purposefully cut down. It even ended up on the news, due to the likely malicious intentions behind it, but nothing further was ever known about it. If that man I'd encountered was the one to cut it down is unknown, but the fact that his car was just sitting there and the very strange way he was behaving makes me think it was. In the months since, I haven't had any more occurrences along that route. but I still find myself fully awake, even on days when I'm tired. Every night I drive home from work on that road. I drive part-time for Uber Eats. I'm a college student, so it's a great job to work around my school schedule. This happened on a night after my classes. It was probably around 11 p.m. and I didn't have class until late in the afternoon the next day, so I was planning on staying up late and grinding out as many orders as I could. At 1 a.m., I got a rare grocery order to pick up from a 7-Eleven and drop off at some address 15 minutes away. The directions took me through a few neighborhoods, going all the way to the back that led up to the woods before I stopped at the end of a gravel road. I looked at the address on the app and it said it was down this road, but all I saw were a bunch of safety cones and construction things with no streetlights. I carefully went down, turning my brights on and navigating through until I reached the last turn. This was even more sketchy though, being more of a path than a road. I looked more closely at the map again, and it was clearly telling me the address was down this way. I lifted my head and looked further down the path, and as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I started to notice a structure at the end. It kind of resembled a house, but there was definitely something off about it. I then looked around and started to notice more houses. There wasn't enough light coming from my headlights for me to see them well, but based off what I could see, it looked like this was a community of new-build houses in construction. Knowing this, I figured since the house on my GPS was one of the first on the path, maybe it was already complete. I turned and started heading down, pulling into an empty cul-de-sac with a single house on it. Up close now, it was definitely not complete, at least not fully complete. The front of it did look nearly done though, having a door and everything, which made this all really hard to figure out. At the end of the day though, all I had to do was deliver the stuff where I'm told, not to worry about someone else's housing situation. I parked and got out with the groceries, walking up to the front door and knocking. All the lights were off and it was completely quiet, enough to make me feel a bit uneasy. I set down the bags and turned around to get back to my car, but in the side of my view, I saw something move by the trees. I stopped for a moment, staring at the darkness in the woods. Whatever I saw wasn't moving anymore. I started walking quickly, getting in my car and turning it on. As soon as the headlights flashed, I saw a man standing right where I'd seen the movement in the woods. He was staring in my direction, watching intently as I started to back out. I felt my heartbeat rising as I looked at the man and wasn't paying attention to the road. I only rolled back 10 feet before I felt a huge bump on my back tires, followed again by my front. It was enough to make the entire car rock back and forth for a second, but my adrenaline was rushing too much for me to even get a good look at what it was that caused it. I pressed on the gas harder, getting off the path and onto the gravel road. Once I made it into the normal neighborhood, it was more obvious that my car was shaking and bumping, and there was no doubt that I had several flat tires. I was able to pull off somewhere where I felt more safe, and then called the police. They searched the address and the Uber Eats account, but the address was an unfinished property that was not lived in, and the account was a throwaway. They did find several large sharpened metal objects on the path though, likely placed after I'd pulled in as an attempt to get me to stop on the path. What they were attempting to do once they had me stuck out there in the woods is hard to say. Maybe rob me, or maybe something else, but at least I didn't have to find out. It was late, about 3 a.m., as I was driving home from a work meet that ran late. This was a once-a-year meeting that took place 8 hours from the location I worked at. Driving through this state sucks because outside of the city it's mostly farmland, miles and miles long of just plain fields of crops. At least with the bare roads, I was able to space out and only have to focus on going straight. As I drove, though, it was out of nowhere that I saw a huge gap in the crops to the right of the road. When I passed it, I saw a car wedged pretty far into the crops, as if they had driven off the road and weren't able to stop. It was not something I'd expected to see, but I couldn't see how running into a field of crops could really be harmful to them, or have done anything significant enough for me to have to call for help. There was still service out here too, so they could definitely call for themselves. The car also wasn't on, which made me feel like they'd already been picked up or something. I continued driving, making it just a minute or two down the road, before a set of headlights came up in front of me. After only a couple seconds, I was gaining on them extremely fast, and had to swerve into the other lane to pass them. The speed limit was 80 on this highway, and that car had to be going no more than 25, which was insanely dangerous. Almost as soon as I passed them, though, they started speeding up, visibly getting closer and closer by the second, until they were right behind me. I thought this was just one of those ego-obsessed losers that couldn't handle getting passed on the road, so I assumed he'd just speed past me and be on his way. But instead, he merged into the oncoming traffic lane and pulled his car right next to mine. I looked over and saw this man looking me in the eyes, but strangely, he didn't look angry. He had a slight smirk on his face, and that was about it. He looked to be in his mid-40s, with longish hair and an unkempt beard. I moved my eyes away and back to the road, getting a little nervous. The car next to me then sped up and went right in front of me, slamming on their brakes and forcing me to do the same, before they suddenly turned their car to block both lanes and stopped right in the middle of the road. I was able to stop about 15 feet from them, too in shock to understand the severity of what was going on. The man didn't waste any time, getting out of his car right away and sprinting straight for me. There was no effort to hide his intentions, as he held a gun in one hand and now had a hood pulled over his head. I didn't have time to go in reverse, so I just pressed on the gas and swerved off the road, ramming into the crops on someone's farmland. For a moment, my car was continuing forward without letting me turn, as it started slowing, even with the gas pedal pressed all the way down. In that instant, my heart sank and a wave of terror ran through me, thinking about the other car I'd seen that was stuck in the crops. But suddenly my wheels caught traction again, and I was able to swerve back out of the field and onto the other side of the road, hearing a single distant gunshot as I sped off. I called 911 and gave specific details on what happened, as well as telling them about the car I'd seen stuck in the field of crops. Whoever that man was out on the road that tried to stop me was never found. The police were able to locate the other car, but it was empty, no signs of the driver. It was just like they had suddenly swerved off the road and gotten stuck, then just disappeared, and who knows what happened afterward. Their situation was eerily similar to what would have happened to me, but if I had gotten stuck as well, then the other person in that car probably wouldn't have been the only one to have disappeared that night. A couple of years ago, I bought a gaming computer on Facebook Marketplace. I've been wanting to buy one for a while, and I knew that they're typically very expensive. So that gave me the idea to go on Facebook Marketplace and look for a used one. After several days of looking, I found one that I wanted. I decided to reach out to the seller and ask a little more information about it. The seller was a guy named Jeremy. We went back and forth a little bit, and I decided that I wanted to buy it. It was a pretty good deal, so we agreed on a day that I would go over and get the computer. It also came with a monitor, keyboard, and mouse as well. So after I bought it, I took it home, set it up, and started using it. I was happy with my purchase, and I used the computer for the next week and a half. Then I got another message on Facebook from Jeremy. He said that he wanted his computer back. I was really confused when I saw this, because he had just sold it to me like a week before. He said that he changed his mind and wanted it back now. I didn't want to return it. I liked the computer, and I had already installed several games and other programs on it. I told Jeremy no, I wasn't going to return it. Then Jeremy said that he would give me a certain amount of money for it. The funny thing is that the amount he offered was less than I paid for the computer by a few $100s. I pointed that out, and he said that it was all he could afford to give. Now when he originally said he wanted it back, I assumed that meant he would pay the full price. I said the answer was still no. I was really annoyed that this guy was trying to get the computer back, and even more annoyed that he wasn't offering the full price. If he didn't want to sell it, then he shouldn't have sold it. However, Jeremy was not happy that I refused to give the computer back. He then sent me a friend request on Facebook, and then started messaging me a bunch of times. I ignored him for a while, but after he kept sending me messages for like 3 days straight, I blocked him. I thought that was that. This situation was strange enough. But unfortunately, that was not the end of Jeremy. Probably about a week after I blocked Jeremy, he showed up to my house. I happened to be home alone and was in my bedroom, on the very gaming computer that I had bought from Jeremy. It was nighttime and about 8 p.m. and dark out. I heard a knocking coming from the front door. I got up and left my room and went over to the living room and then looked out of the window. Jeremy was there on the front step. I recognized him from when I bought the computer. How did he know where I lived? This was really strange. I watched him stand there and knock again on the front door. I was wondering what on earth he had planned. Did he think that by showing up at my house unannounced that would make me change my mind? I stayed in the living room and ignored his knocks. I was hoping that he would just go away, and most of the lights in my house were off, so maybe he would think that I wasn't home. But I watched Jeremy hang around the front step for several more minutes. I was kind of looking around, and I had to move back from the window so that he wouldn't see me. He came back and knocked again on the front door, this time louder. He also yelled, asking for me to come outside. I still ignored him. I walked back to my bedroom, hoping that Jeremy would eventually give up and leave. When I got back to my room, I put in some headphones and sat back down at my computer. For the next 5 minutes or so, everything was fine. But suddenly, I heard a knocking sound. I took out my headphones and looked to the direction of my window. Jeremy was standing there, looking into my bedroom. I got up and ran over to the window and closed the blinds. Jeremy started yelling at me, but I couldn't really hear what he said very well. I left my bedroom and went back towards the living room. By that time, Jeremy had made his way back towards my front door. Then he started banging on it again. I went over to the door and shouted to him that I was going to call the police. Jeremy yelled at me to give the computer back. Then I called the cops. I told him what was going on, and Jeremy still wasn't leaving, and he continued to stay there, even after I got off the phone with the police. But unfortunately, he finally left just moments before the cops got there. I talked to them, gave them a description of Jeremy, and told them my side of the story. After that, the police left and said to call back if Jeremy ever returned. I was afraid that he would, but luckily he didn't. I still have a hard time believing how crazy it was, and I can't believe that that actually happened. I had recently gotten a new car and had to sell my old one. I had bought it used. It was kind of old, so I listed it on Facebook Marketplace. I was told that was a good place to sell a car. It seemed better than Craigslist, which always seemed a little bit sketchy to me. So after listing the car, I did receive a few messages about it in the first couple of days, but none of them really went anywhere. Then I would get the first serious interest. It was a man by the name of Ben on Facebook. he messaged me and said that he wanted to buy my car. We talked briefly, and basically the guy wanted to meet up and look at the car as soon as possible. I suggested a nearby shopping center parking lot for us to meet. At this point, it was sometime in the afternoon, and Ben wanted to meet that same night. I said that would be fine, and we agreed on 8:30 p.m. in the back of the parking lot. The shopping center had quite a few stores and a very large parking lot. Most of it was usually always empty. It was maybe 10 minutes from my house. So I ended up going there expecting to meet Ben, who was seeming to be a serious buyer. I arrived slightly early, and after getting there, let Ben know that I was there. Then I just waited. Some time went by, and 8:30 came and went. Ben still hadn't showed up. I messaged him, asking where he was. He didn't respond though. I was getting frustrated. It appeared as though he had changed his mind about the car without telling me. After waiting past 9 o'clock, I finally left and started driving back home. About 10 minutes later, I arrived. At the time, I lived alone in a smaller house. As I was driving down my street, which is usually very quiet, I noticed headlights quickly coming up behind me. I remember thinking to myself, that person was going a little bit fast for this street. By the time I reached my driveway, they were right on my tail. So I pulled into my driveway, expecting them to drive past, but then the car that was behind me pulled in right after. Now my driveway was pretty short but sort of wide. It could barely take two cars in front of each other. The car I usually drove was in the garage, and I was driving the one that I was trying to sell. So after this car pulled in behind me, I could only see the bright headlights shining in. I had a bad feeling about it. I wasn't expecting anyone at my house, and had no clue as to who this could be. But then I got the idea that maybe it was the guy from Facebook Marketplace. I knew that I couldn't get out of my car, so I turned to the right a little. Then I saw the car behind me start to turn to the right. I didn't know what exactly to do. I wanted to leave, but I felt like my car might be stuck there. The car behind me then started honking. I did not recognize the vehicle and was 100% sure that I didn't know this person. I then turned my wheel and just hit the gas. My car narrowly missed my garage, but I made it. Then I started to make a U-turn, but the car ended up going into the grass of my front yard off of the driveway. When I did this, the car behind me started backing up and turning to try to keep up with me. I was able to make it out of the driveway and started going down my road as quickly as I could. The car behind me was soon able to follow. I drove to the end of my street and then went through some residential streets for a short time. Then eventually I made it to a busier road. I traveled on that for a while, and then sometime over there is when the car behind me stopped following. I'm not sure when, because I was looking forward for several minutes, and there were also some other cars out on that road, but sometime whoever was following me stopped. Then I carefully went back home. Luckily, I didn't see the car again. I just have a feeling that that was Ben from Facebook Marketplace. He was probably just trying to follow me home and never even wanting to look at the car. Maybe he was going to try to steal the car or rob me. That's my best guess. But when I went back onto Facebook, he had blocked me. I tried reporting it to Facebook Marketplace, but I'm not sure what could really be done. After that, though, I haven't used Facebook Marketplace since. This happened in August of 2019. I was using Facebook Marketplace to look for some furniture. I had used Marketplace as a way to both buy and sell things several times before. For me, it had worked great to that point. However, I had the weirdest experience of my life the last time that I used it. So I remember that I found this desk that seemed good. I was looking for one. I just wanted like a very basic desk. Then I could paint it and do other stuff to customize it if I wanted. So I was searching for really cheap ones, and I found one that I really liked for about $10. I contacted the seller and said that I could come over the next day and get it. The seller was a guy named Corey. So Corey told me to come anytime the next day, but to just let him know. So the next day, he gave me his address, and I texted him and then headed over when it was all right. I put his address into my maps on my phone and drove over there. I drove my SUV and removed the back seats to fit the desk. When I arrived in Corey's neighborhood, it did not appear to be very nice. Several of the homes seemed to be vacant or abandoned. Some had overgrown grass and trees in the front yard, and others had graffiti on them. And Corey's place was not too much nicer. It was this small white house that was really dirty and had long grass. I looked multiple times to make sure that I was in the right place, and I was. So I parked on the side of the road and texted Corey. He told me to come on inside. So I walked up through the yard of overgrown grass and then to the front step and knocked on the door. I waited for almost a minute before the door opened. This man with long hair and a long beard answered. I told him that I was there for the desk he was selling on Facebook Marketplace. He then told me to come inside and pointed over to the desk. It was sitting on the ground not far away from the front door at all. Inside of Corey's house, there appeared to be almost no furniture at all. That was kind of strange, but I walked over and then Corey offered to help me with the desk. We both grabbed one end and carefully lifted it. Then we walked it to my car and put it in the back. I paid Corey the money and overall, he seemed pretty nice. Then he went back to his house and I got inside of my car and drove away. Now, after getting back home, I was able to unload the desk by myself and get it inside. Then I got a good look at it for the first time. The desk had a few drawers, but I realized they were all empty except for one. Inside one of the drawers, in the very back, there was this envelope taped to the inside of it. I was curious as to what it was, and I took it and opened it. Inside were a bunch of pictures. They were all taken from a disposable camera. Most of the pictures were of my Facebook profile though. It was like somebody had taken a picture of a computer screen. It really creeped me out when I saw it. Then there were a few others. One was of the listing of my apartment building online. That one confused me at first. But then I saw a few more pictures, and they were of me. It was when I was walking up to Corey's house and when I was getting out of my car. I was so freaked out by this, but I didn't know what to do. I went onto Facebook again to try to find Corey's account, but I couldn't. It was like he was just gone. Either he deleted his account or he blocked me or something. After that, I just kind of moved on. I still have the desk, and I don't know where the envelope with pictures are. I think I lost it. I'm just glad that I never saw Corey again after that. Maybe it was his idea of a joke or something, but it was sure creepy. Last year, I was selling a motorized scooter on Facebook Marketplace. This scooter was pretty new and one of the nicer ones as well. I had got it brand new for over $500. Well, not long after listing it at all, it started to get some interest. There was this one guy who messaged me about it pretty early on and said that he wanted to come over and look at it. I asked him how serious he was about it, and he said very. I had the scooter in my garage, and after this guy agreed to pay the full price for it, I told him that he could come over and buy it. I gave him my address, which is a pretty standard house where I live with my wife. That evening at around 6 p.m., the guy came over. I went out into the driveway and met him there. I can't remember what his name was, but I was basically expecting him to see the scooter, turn it on and try it, and then give me the money. I had my garage door open and the scooter was just outside of it. The guy walked over and looked at the scooter. We turned it on and I showed him that it worked. But then the guy looked at it for a while longer and said that he would have to think about it. I told him that I thought he said he was serious, and he said that he was. But then he said something about he would get it when he got paid next week. I knew that meant probably no, and I just said all right, whatever, and then said bye to the guy. He walked away, and I put the scooter away back in the garage. Then I went inside of my house. So hours later at probably 10 or 11 p.m. that night, I was inside and going to go to bed very soon. I was in the living room with my wife, and we heard this noise coming from outside. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, and I got up to look out the window, but really couldn't see anything. As I was looking though, we heard another noise. I still couldn't tell what it was, so I went over to the front door and I opened it. I knew the noise was coming from outside and near the driveway. After I opened up the door, I heard some movement from the bushes near the garage. I stepped outside and asked who was there. Nobody answered me. I walked closer to where I heard the sounds. It was very dark and quiet now. I couldn't see very well, but I continued to go closer. Soon I reached my garage area. There were some bushes to the side of it, between the fence leading to my next door neighbor's yard. I walked over to that, and then I realized that the smaller door to my garage was open a crack. At this point, I probably should have walked back inside my house and called the police, but I didn't. Instead, I walked to the door and opened it. I looked inside of the dark garage, but just moments later, I saw some movement and then noticed a man walking towards me. I moved back and left the garage. I went back towards my house and then heard the guy running in another direction behind me. When I looked, I noticed that it was the same guy who had come to look at the scooter earlier. He now ran into the street in the opposite direction and then quickly went out of my sight. Somehow, he had gotten into my garage, probably to try to steal the scooter. I called the police and then moved the scooter to inside of my house. The cops came out and I had a conversation with them, but the guy was long gone. After that, they left. Luckily, the man never came back. His Facebook account was deleted too, so I couldn't give it to the police. That was my craziest experience with Facebook Marketplace. This is something that I will never forget. It happened almost 5 years ago now. For some background, I'm a female and was looking to buy a car at the time of this story. I wanted to get something used and somewhat cheap, so I looked at both Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. After searching those sites for about a week, I found this car that looked really good. It seemed to be a good deal, and after all of my research, I wanted to look at it. So I contacted the seller, saying how I was interested in all that stuff. We ended up talking and arranging a time to meet up and look at the car. The seller was a guy named Mike. He was a bigger guy with a dark goatee. We agreed to meet at this gas station about 5 miles from where I lived. I figured that meeting in a public place would be safe. So I drove my current car at the time, which was barely running. I got to the gas station at about 7 p.m. Things were quiet, and minutes later, I saw the car that I wanted to buy enter. It parked in the back, and I walked over and met Mike. We talked about the car a little bit, and then he asked me if I wanted to take it for a test drive. I did, because I wanted to make sure that the car ran good and everything. So I remember that Mike told me to get in the passenger seat, and he would show me some things with the car, then let me drive it. Nothing seemed strange about that at first, so I got inside. We then left the gas station and started driving down the road. Mike started talking about the car again, just saying basic stuff. But then after like 5 minutes, I was expecting him to stop driving and let me take over, but he just kept going down the road. And also, I didn't even know where we were anymore. Mike was driving the car down these quiet roads with woods on both sides mainly. We were going farther and farther away from where I lived and the area that I was familiar with. After like 10 minutes, I started to get really worried because Mike was also talking less and less. Now he would maybe say something about the car every minute, and mostly he would just be driving in silence. Finally, I said to Mike, "So can I drive the car now?" Mike quickly responded and said, "Just 1 more minute, I'll let you drive it soon enough." But then like 2 or 3 more minutes passed of us just driving in silence. Then Mike finally started to pull over to the side of the road. We were the only vehicle around, it seemed, and things were very dark and quiet. I thought that he was finally going to let me drive, but as we came to a stop, I noticed this little path going into the woods off the road. There was an SUV with the lights off parked on this path. After we came to a stop, I noticed the driver's and passenger's door opening up on the SUV. I didn't know what was going on, but I had a really bad feeling about it. Mike then turned to me and told me to give him my phone. I asked him why, and at the same time, saw multiple people walking from the SUV. They were a good 50 feet away, and I couldn't really tell any details about them. Mike was starting to talk, but I don't remember anything that he said, because as soon as I saw people walking near, I knew that I needed to run away. I opened up the passenger's door and got out. Then I just started sprinting to the woods. As I was running, I heard some commotion. People behind me started to run. and I heard several men's voices shouting. I didn't stop though, and I kept running. I got to the woods and then started running through trees and brush. I heard the people chasing after me, but I didn't stop. As I continued to run, after maybe a minute, I took my phone out, hit 911, and continued running as I did so. I was doing pretty well running through the woods. I still heard people behind me though, but they were a ways back. I didn't know if I had gotten on with 911 or not, because I was too busy running to stop and look, but I just started saying that I was being chased in the woods and I needed help. I hoped that somebody would hear me. I ran for about as long as I could, and soon, I stopped hearing the noises behind me. I was able to slow down after that, and eventually, I stopped and I hid. I didn't hear anything, but I once again called the police. They were on the way, and I tried to tell them where I was. They were able to locate me pretty well based off of my call though. Soon, I made my way back through the woods and met the police. Mike and the other people were gone, but I told the police what had happened and gave descriptions as best as I could. The only person that I could really describe though was Mike. The police were able to locate him not long after this. I feel so lucky to have gotten away. So, this happened a few months ago. I'm a sophomore in college and was traveling down to my hometown over break. I was having some relationship issues with my stepmom, so I didn't want to stay at my dad's house the night I arrived at my hometown. I phoned a friend of mine from high school if I could stay at his place. I knew from social media that he was still in town, and I've stayed at his place before, so I knew there would be a place for me to stay if they could allow it. My friend, let's call him Z, seemed like a pretty normal dude. We weren't best friends or anything, but we got pretty close by the time we graduated. We would occasionally text or hang out if I was in town and catch up, reminisce on the times we spent in orchestra or in English class. When I called, he seemed extremely enthusiastic. Z's a normally upbeat guy, but this time it seemed like he was getting a brand new car. I didn't think about it at the time, and he said I could sleep in the guest room, so I headed over. When I got to his house, he was just as excited as he was on the phone. He was bringing up stuff to do like getting high and watching weird movies or playing video games. Z's parents weren't home, so he really wanted the opportunity to smoke. I was pretty tired from the drive, but since we rarely see each other, I thought a little bit of bonding couldn't hurt. We played Smash Bros, smoked some weed, and just chatted for a few hours. It was longer than I wanted, but I was having fun, so whatever, right? By the time it was getting late, around 2 a.m., he started asking some pretty weird questions, like if I ever wondered what it was like to kill someone or if I thought anyone would miss me if I was gone. This, along with some pretty normal questions like if I had a boyfriend or how my parents are doing or if I'm making any friends at school, gave me a weird feeling. I was confused in the moment, but it didn't hit me until after that Z could be assessing me for something bad. The weirdness of it all made me just want to go to bed. We stopped the game and both went into the basement where his room and the guest room were. We said goodnight. I went to my room and got ready for bed. I'm having trouble sleeping, just insomnia that I've had for a while, so I stay awake for around an hour until I hear some movement outside my room. The walls were pretty thin, so I could hear footsteps walking past my door and up the stairs to the main floor, then back down quickly after. What struck me as odd was that I didn't hear the basement door open, which creaks when it does. The light didn't turn on, so I was confused what Z was doing. I heard him go back into his room, but I had this odd feeling. Just ever since I met him this night, he seemed a lot different than he's ever been. I decided to look him up on social media and Google to see anything out of the ordinary. Everything seemed normal until I found his Tumblr, which was linked from his inactive Twitter account that I found on my Twitter contact list. His Tumblr was, well, disturbing. There were graphic drawings of mutilated bodies of humans and animals, links to suspicious-looking websites that I didn't dare to click on, text posts about murdering, cannibalism, necrophilia, and torture. There were photos of guns, knives, and axes, which after looking closely, were taken in his bedroom. The last post, around a week prior, was a text post from the account saying he wished he could find someone easy to kill like a homeless person. I was immediately filled with dread. I knew he was going to do something. He must have gone up the stairs to lock the door. I packed my things. Luckily I packed lightly, and opened the small window at the top of my bedroom wall. I started desperately climbing through, and as I was pulling my legs through, he opened the door. It was dark, but the streetlight illuminated enough for me to see he was carrying something long and skinny, so probably a knife. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. I just turned around, hopped in my car, and drove as fast as I could to my dad's house. I immediately blocked him everywhere and reported his Tumblr account, not before telling the police. They said they couldn't do anything, as the guns were registered under his dad, and he hasn't actually done anything yet. Nevertheless, I told my other high school friends not to hang out with Z. Ever since then I've been creeped out whenever I meet new people. Just the realization that someone I knew so well could underneath be this person who could hurt me so bad, who could kill me. This started when I was in 10th grade at the small private school I attended for high school. To give some background, I am female, and I tend to attract stalkers because I have difficulty being stern with people. About halfway into the semester, we had this new guy, Tim, transfer from New Mexico. He was your typical scrawny, smelly, nerdy, white teenage boy. But he was also fairly quiet. He had these rose-tinted glasses that made him stand out. I had a small group of guy friends, and he kinda clung on to us. No harm, he was just annoying. He made lots of jokes that may have been funny if we were 10, but just made him seem childish when we were 16. The guy I was semi-interested in at the time sort of befriended him, and so I tagged along. He confessed to us that he had to cross the country to live with his grandparents because he was suicidal, and he had no friends back home. I felt so sorry for him. I continued to hang out with him, and even tried to get the rest of our class to be nicer to him. That year, he asked me to the banquet, something like prom, but the entire high school can attend, and while I felt bad for him, I didn't feel that bad. I told him I didn't plan on attending, which was true, and he seemed fine. I started noticing that he stared at me all the time now, and the guy I liked told me that I was all he ever talked about. He seemed harmless, so I was just flattered. Fast forward to 12th grade, everything had been about the same, only semi-weird, more annoying than anything. But in the beginning of 12th grade, I received a text from an out-of-state area code. "This is Emily, right?" Assuming it was one of my friends from a camp I attended every year. "Nope, think again," was the response. This question game went on for a while until I finally got Tim to confess it was him. I was shocked. I hadn't given this guy my number. How had he figured it out? I never did quite figure that out, though some of my guy friends have since told me that Tim stole one of their phones at one point. He started texting me every day, beginning with things like, "What was the homework assignment?" He started stalking me at school too. He repeatedly asked to hang out after school, and he would get violently angry each time I said no. My boyfriend, now fiancé, said that Tim gave him the creeps, but he was understanding about the situation and decided not to get involved until it was necessary. He started taking my papers and replacing my last name with his, raising question with the teacher. Around this time he started calling me too, and his texts turned into, "I love you so much, you're all I care about, you should come live with me, etc. I didn't feel too threatened, so I kept it to myself. But it definitely was getting weird. He started obsessing over everything I was interested in so that we could talk about it. If I didn't text back right away, he sent me 20 messages asking me where I was and what was taking so long for me to get back to him. He started joking that he was under my bed, in my closet, waiting in the bathroom. I was starting to get freaked out. He would stalk my social media accounts and edit my photos and put my head on naked women's bodies and send them back to me. He also always had a picture of me as his background, or so I've been told by my guy friends. One night he texted me and asked if I would send a picture of my boobs, because he had never seen breasts before. A few nights later, he asked again, and when I declined, he asked if he could call me. Over the phone, he proceeded to ask if I wanted to masturbate with him, so we could hear how the other sounded in bed. I said no, and hung up immediately. He started telling everyone at school that we were close, and that we were working on secret projects together. Everyone just assumed I was cheating on my boyfriend with Tim. Tim also began telling me about how he was working on a bomb at home, and he was going to blow up our school. "Don't worry," he said. "I would save you. You're special." I finally, after graduation, and Tim had gone back to New Mexico, told my boyfriend everything, and he called and had a talk with Tim. My boyfriend still hasn't told me exactly what Tim said to him, but he called me after the conversation pretty shaken. He told me to tell Tim I couldn't talk to him anymore, and block his number. He says things that make me wonder how severe it was though. Like, "He's messed up. I think he would kill you so I couldn't have you." I know I should have blocked him way before I did. I just felt bad for him. And also, by the end, I wasn't sure what he was capable of. I had to see him every day at school. Blocking him may have resulted in a serious problem. I haven't talked to Tim since, and I hope I never do. I was a freshman when this happened. I've always struggled with my sexuality. I struggle to figure out who I like. I never thought this would get me in trouble. I met this boy through a friend. He was a junior at this time. They were dating, but my friend was miserable. He took her virginity, but failed to mention he had HIV. When they broke up, he reached out to me because he wanted to date me. I thought, why not? It could help me figure things out. Well, this is where it gets weird. So the date was weird, but I realized I felt nothing for this guy. He tried to kiss me and I didn't want it. I told him nicely and explained that I just wasn't interested in boys at the time. He tried to persuade me to date him. He texted me a lot, and I was already stressed because I cut out a toxic friend. Finally, he stopped, and I thought that was the end of it. I was enjoying a nice night with my family, and my mom starts talking about how this boy was messaging her about me, telling my mom that he was a real man, and that he could treat me better than anyone else. I was baffled. I tried so hard to tell this guy nicely that I wasn't interested, and then he does that? I told him to leave me and my family alone, to leave my friends alone, and not spit my name out of his mouth. This only angered him. I already hated school because I wasn't well liked. I was bullied throughout my entire school career, and I would cry every morning before school because I couldn't stand it. I'm already on edge, trying to keep people's eyes off of me, but then this boy starts following me. When I was in the cafeteria, he was too. When I went out to my locker, he would follow and pretend to shift through his locker, glancing at me. He kept trying to reach me online, and I had to block him. He reached out to my friends and started calling me a bitch, and that I missed out on a real man. I got so fed up that I confronted him. My hands were shaking, and I could feel my blood boiling. I told him, a real man would take no for an answer and move on. I told you to leave me alone and you keep harassing me. After that, I went to my class and tried to stop myself from screaming. While this was happening, He was targeting another girl, my now ex-friend. She helped in getting rid of my toxic friend and I was grateful. We both became friends with the boy. And after he couldn't get me, he went to my friend. He harassed her and me at the same time. He even did it to his ex. I was fed up with the constant harassment and stalking. I didn't feel comfortable at all. He knew where I lived and could easily come to my house. I went to the school's resource officer with my evidence of the stalking and laid the story out for him. He said he would talk to him, but the stalking continued. It never stopped. He was more stealthy, but he still lurked. This was the last straw for my mom. She pulled me out of public school and started me on online schooling. I lost all my friends, but I made better ones online. This story is something my family laughs about now since it makes it easier for me to cope. He still lurks to this day, but I feel safer now. This goes back to when I was 15 and a sophomore in high school. I only had a few friends and would walk by myself to and from most of my classes because small talk made me nervous thanks to some anxiety issues. I was walking to class one day, and this guy, we'll call him Creeper, came out of nowhere and started walking next to me. He was a bit too close for comfort, so I moved over, but he followed. He was so close to me his arm was brushing against my shoulder. For context, I'm 5 feet 1 and 93 pounds, and this guy was at least 6 feet 2 and 180 pounds, and probably a year or two older. I'd had some bad experiences with strange men in the past, so I was getting pretty uneasy. He finally decided to introduce himself. "Hey, I'm Creeper. You're Miss Wiggly, right?" Of course, I was taken aback since I had no clue who this dude was, and had never seen him before. "Do I know you?" I asked. What he said next gave me chills, and still creeps me out to this day. "No, but I know you." Just like that, he turned and walked away. I saw him the next morning when I was sitting with my friends and waiting for the first bell to ring. I pointed him out to them and asked who he was. They didn't know him either. The bell rang, and we all went our separate ways. I stuck my headphones in my ears and turned on some music for the walk to the first period. I felt an arm brushing against my shoulder. I looked out of the corner of my eye and saw Creeper there, staring down at me with this weird grin. I moved away from him, and just like before, he moved right with me. He pulled my headphones off and started asking me for my number. When I told him no, he started begging like he was trying to be cute. "Please, can I have your number? You're so pretty, I just want to be able to call you." I said nothing. Then he started asking me if I had a boyfriend, and if that was why I wouldn't talk to him. I got to my class and hurried in, and he stood by the door staring and grinning for a few seconds before he left. This went on for several weeks. He started turning up everywhere I went. I would even take detours to try and throw him off, but he would eventually pick up on those too. Every day he would ask if I had a boyfriend, and if I would just give him my phone number. After telling him no multiple times, I eventually gave up and just started giving him the cold shoulder. One afternoon, I was walking to the bus parking lot to catch my ride home. Suddenly, my headphones were tugged out of my ears, and lo and behold, there's Creeper. "You never gave me your number," he whined. I put my earbuds back in only to have them yanked out again. "Why won't you just give me your number? Come on, haven't I been nice to you?" I hopped on my bus and thanked the gods that he didn't follow. That night, I got a text message from an unknown number. "Hey," I ask who it is, and soon after get the reply, "Creeper, are you a virgin?" Now I'm sitting here thinking, how the hell did he get my cell number? I did have a Facebook and a MySpace account, but neither one of them had my email or phone number visible to anyone but my friends. The next morning, I called the phone company, and asked them to block his number so he couldn't contact me. The next day, I was walking between the two buildings of the high school on my way to a midday class, and he shows up again. "Why aren't you answering your phone? Why won't you message me back?" I told him I couldn't talk because I was going to be late for class and walked faster. He caught up and raised his voice a bit. "Why won't you answer my calls? I want you to be my girlfriend." I ignored him, and I guess he was tired of that because then he got really angry. He ran up behind me and grabbed the handle on my backpack and the hood of my jacket with the same hand and yanked me backward. I reached forward and grabbed the handle of the heavy metal door of the next building. I was screaming at him at this point. "Let me go. Just leave me the fuck alone." He was still trying to pull me behind the building, and I was about to lose my grip on the door handle when I guess he realized that I'd created a scene. He let go and nervously said something along the lines of, he was just playing and to stop being so serious. After that, he would try to message me on Facebook once in a while, but I blocked him there too. Thankfully, I haven't heard from him since. This happened while I was in 11th grade. I'm a female and tend to be a people pleaser. I never like to call anyone out, reject anyone outright, or act like someone is weird. I'm also a bit open-minded and tend to go with the flow. School had started in early September, and in my marine biology class, I noticed this boy kept staring at me from the corner of my eye. I just made one of those half smiles towards him to acknowledge him, and went on about my assignment. I really did not think much of it for a couple of weeks, even though he continued to stare. He was very skinny and tall, had brown hair, eyes that were so brown they could have been black, and a generally nondescript face other than his super dark eyes. One day, he decided to say hi. I said hello back to him. He told me his name, which was Alex. I told him mine, but he said that he already knew my name. That's not a surprise as I have rather large handwriting, and he could have easily watched me write my name on my papers since he was staring at me so much. It was just kind of odd that he didn't really have any facial expression when he flatly said he knew my name. I just laughed a little, said "Oh, okay," and began putting my things back in my bag as the bell was about to ring. I only had a few friends, and we always sat at the same table during lunch. We were rather quiet, and most times read while we ate. That means I don't usually look around the lunchroom as I have my eyes in my book. This day, my friend finished her novel, so I decided to put mine away, and we could just talk. I immediately noticed Alex staring at us from the courtyard tables. He never seemed to be embarrassed that I noticed him. I showed him to my friend and told her about my class with him. She found it to be super creepy, but I said he's probably harmless and just socially awkward. I arrived in marine biology a little early later that day, and so it was just myself, Alex, and one other girl for about 10 minutes. I half smiled at Alex, and then I decided to break out my book and start reading again. He had his hands up folded over his mouth and was staring again. At this time, it just felt awkward because we were basically alone now. I glanced over at him and kind of raised my eyebrows a little as if to say yes. He looked me up and down very slowly, and I just asked him if he was okay. He said yes, that he was just inside of his head thinking, "Okay, whatever, that's fine." The next day at lunch, there was a little piece of paper on the table that we sit at that had my name on the front, but not just my first name, my first and middle name. I opened it, and it said something like, "I wonder what your asshole would look like with a thick PVC pipe shoved up it." I looked around, but didn't see Alex. I immediately knew it was him. I was very scared to come to class later that day, but he wasn't there. I felt a lot better about not seeing him. The note itself was gross and embarrassing. I didn't want to show it to any administrators because of that. I just threw it out. I went to the bus area at the end of the day, like usual. But this time I noticed Alex leaning on one of the pillars with his backpack on one shoulder. I literally felt chills down my spine when I noticed a white PVC pipe poking out of the top of his backpack through the zippers. I didn't give him any reaction to my knowledge, even though I'm sure he was watching me read the note. The next morning, I made an appointment with a counselor and had my class changed. She was very reluctant to do that for me because we were already in the school year, well over a month and a half. But I think since I have a history of good grades and behavior, she helped me out. I spent the rest of the year avidly avoiding him. He kept staring at lunchtime, and one time he took photos of me at the bus area without my consent. Even though it was against school policy, I got some pepper spray for when I get off at my bus stop. I have no clue what happened to him, because when 12th grade began, he was no longer at our school. I'm not sure if I even want to know how he turned out.